Jalen should have a lot of confidence with who he's throwing the football to, and he's protected at the same time. So my point is, really, we all know this. It falls on Jalen, but he is so, to me, level and in command. I know he talked about it this week, but I had a chance to talk to him, a little bit after practice, and he was like, man, people want me to ride waves, and I just don't do it. Like, I don't really, and he really told me, like, I don't listen to anything else outside the building. And, guys say that. I think with him, I actually kind of believe it.
All right, welcome back in, everybody. Rob Ellis, Derek Gunn on this Thursday. Barrett had to step off for a moment. We are Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. Love talking to our next guest. Thrilled that he was able to give us a couple minutes today. You can follow him on Twitter at James Palmer TV. Covers the NFL for the NFL Network. Gunner, you don't think James has gone big time? Look at this. Let me just give you the next 3 games that he's covering, okay? How about Russell Wilson taking on his old team, number 1, as if that wasn't enough. Chargers, Chiefs Thursday, and then he comes back to the homeland for the Eagles and the Vikings on Monday night. James, what's up, my man? How you doing?
What's up, guys? That's 3 games in the first 2 weeks. Could be more excited. I'm also here in a bomb shelter of some sort here at the Broncos team facility, getting ready to hear from Russell Wilson a little bit, do a little TV behind me. This is our little NFL Network setup shooting behind me. So sorry if it looks a little bit weird, but yeah, we're back in facilities full time, guys, back in locker rooms and back doing tons and tons of games, which I'm excited about.
That's what it's all about, man. Hey, Gunner, you muted. Go ahead. There you go.
It's funny, James, in all the years I've known you, I don't think I've ever seen you without a shirt and tie. I don't think I've seen you in a T-shirt, open collar shirt. It's always a shirt and tie.
Listen, Gunner, I take it a step further from like every mic is a hot mic. It's like every opportunity to jump on television is, every moment of every day is potentially a camera could be on you. So you gotta be suited and booted.
I love it. I love it, James. So I want to get to the Eagles with you, and obviously I know you keep a close eye on them, but man, it's got to be crazy, the hype in your city in Denver for this matchup with Russell Wilson and the Seahawks. So what's your sense of kind of where things are? Is there trepidation a little bit because it's his old team? What's your sense of this game?
Oh, there's no trepidation. I mean, they think they're getting a Lombardi trophy this year. It is wild here in Denver. But, I mean, it's been interesting. I wrote a big piece on NFL.com about it when the new ownership came in. I mean, you now have – in the Walton Penner ownership group that comes in with Rob Walton and his, daughter and his son-in-law, Greg Penner, who's running the group, and Condoleezza Rice and Melody Hobson and Lewis Hamilton, the F1 driver. Like it's a wild group that now has the deepest pockets of any ownership group in the NFL. And then you have a general manager that's really in his second season, a new innovative head coach, a star quarterback. Like it's a brand new organization for one of the historic organizations in the NFL. I mean, the Patriots are the only team that have been to more Super Bowls than the Broncos in the history of this league. So, I mean, there's a lot of excitement around this team, specifically with Russell Wilson. Now, the article that came out on ESPN yesterday, which I know Brady well, and I thought he did a really good job writing that piece about their relationship with Russ and the Seahawks and Russ and Pete. People here in Denver, apparently, from listening to the radio, think it's like a hit piece on Russ. I thought it was very fair that everybody was, I don't want to say to blame, but like relationships go a certain way when everybody is strong feelings about their philosophy on how a team should operate. And so I do think that the Broncos have, talking to plenty of people in the building, given Russ everything that he has wanted, from his own office, from seats on the plane, for his people, for his quarterback coach to be out at practice, for all of these different things. They're catering to all of them. And their belief is if you want a guy to play at a Hall of Fame level, give him everything he thinks he needs to play at that level. And so it appears their philosophy is a little different than, the way it was in Seattle. And talking to Nathaniel Hackett, there's not an offensive system he can't run from where he's been and growing up in this league and being a ball boy for Joe Montana back in the day when his dad was coaching. I mean, he knows everything about this game, and he's going to set it all up for us to succeed. But they just haven't played anybody. So it's going to be interesting because nobody starting for this team has played a snap in the preseason. So it'll be interesting in that environment for us to go out and play.
Wait a minute. Did you say that Russell has his own office?
Yeah.
I've never heard that.
Gunner.
It sounds like your demands, Derek. The stuff that you do with JAKIB. It sounds like
I'm lucky if I have my own closet. Okay. He has his own office.
Mm-hmm. He's got his own office. It is not a normal situation. I mean, the amount of people that are around him, Now, I look at it from two ways, and some people could say, is that a distraction? I think with this organization, it's not. They're just too young of a team, too hungry of a team that haven't won. So I think they're looking for any sort of leadership as possible. I don't think, and you saw this in the article too, nobody in Seattle ever questioned his work ethic, his leadership, his desire, the way he dedicates himself to be successful. And if all that is needed for that, and I've sat down with Russ a couple of times during this training camp and preseason, and the guy is wired one way. And you guys know this. Peyton Manning drove guys crazy. Like Tom Brady drives guys crazy. If you want to be great and you want to get the other 52 guys in the locker room to be great with you, a lot of times you can be difficult to be around. But if you look at it, it's usually the other guy's problem, because the other guy's going to the Hall of Fame. Who's bothering everybody? So, like, I mean, come on now. If you're a teammate, Gunner, and you're like, I'm getting notes in my locker from Peyton Manning on how I should be better. That's my teammate. That's not my coach. But at the same time, that's the way these guys are wired, and that's why they've been so successful. So I think that's just the way Russ is wired, and he's won a lot. I just think it's going to be interesting to see how this offense operates, because they have a lot of different things they can do with the personnel around them. But one really interesting aspect of this game, I talked to Russ about it, and he's like, I'm going to play with no emotion. You can't have emotion in this game. And I was like, I don't know, man. I feel like emotion there. He goes, you can have passion, but I can't play with emotion on Monday night, which I thought was interesting.
And James, the definitive thing that really catches a young player's eye is when an elder statesman of the game does this and shows them the bling. This is what 100%. It's all about. You know what I'm saying? If you want to get a young
guy on
player's
this team that has one.
There you go.
That's it. See? They're kicking. Yeah. That's it.
Well, James, it's an interesting juxtaposition, because of course the expectation is high in Denver, but they're also in a killer division where they're just going to cannibalize each other, right? So you could see one pundit, you have the Broncos making this deep run, another one saying they might not even make the playoffs considering who they're going against. So what's your sense of trying to balance that? Because if they're in the NFC, there might be a totally different discussion here than where they are.
100%. And not just with them, with all four of these teams in this division. I think there's going to be two of them that are going to be sitting at home watching playoff games in the NFC going, I could smoke these teams. I mean, we could smoke somebody here that's in the playoffs because of, and they're going to be sitting at home. I think it's really tough. And we're going to see early. I mean, the Chargers start the season against the Raiders and then against the Chiefs, and the Chiefs are on a short week. And I mean, that could be all of a sudden UCLA right at the top, like right away, if they win both those games and get a jump out on the rest of the division. I mean, I still don't sleep on Mahomes and Andy Reid together. No. I mean, it's been weird lately, hasn't it? Like around the league. I mean, I get the love for Josh Allen. I've spent some time with the Bills this offseason. I get the MVP love. I get all of it. It's like, guys, this dude's been the best quarterback in football since he became a starter. And he's apparently getting overlooked right now, which I don't really understand. And I think he's kind of fueling and gathering some of that stuff to make a statement against the Cardinals and his old college coach in week 1.
Yeah, great read. I agree. I think it's a Tyreek Hill thing, and it's strange to me that you're putting that many eggs in that basket because of how skilled that guy is. And you have Andy Reid and everything else that goes along with it. That's for sure. All right, let's talk some birds here, James, because similar to Denver, there's really high expectation. And Jason Kelsey isn't thrilled with expectations. He went nuts yesterday saying, let's put a damper on this thing real quick. Just what's your vibe? Because you do keep a close eye, but you're also, far enough away from it of how good they actually are.
I did both those joint practices against Cleveland, and I was there for both of those days. And a couple things jumped out at me in those days. There was very, very few reps between, only on the second day because Myles Garrett missed the first day of Myles Garrett going against this offensive line and going against give me our right tackle here.
Lane Johnson.
No, I'm sorry, left tackle, largest human.
Mailata.
Mailata, yeah. And so it's funny, like Mailata and Myles Garrett go only like 2 reps against each other. And the first one was like a bull rush, and Mailata held his own in a sense, but still I'd say Garrett won a little bit. And then Garrett tried to get around the outside of him, probably thinking at that size he's not keeping up with me. And Jordan just kind of pushed him all the way around, and Jordan won the rep. Then on the other side, you have Clowney going against Lane Johnson, and like they only do 1 rep together, and they're both like, yeah, we're good. But Lane won that rep, and I think this offensive line is just so good that obviously everything's going to fall on Jalen to be successful. I saw a really calm quarterback in the team period, specifically in the red zone. I mean, I think he has grown a lot of confidence in two specific players, in my opinion, watching those periods, which is obviously A.J. Brown and the relationship they have, but Dallas Goedert as well. Like, Dallas was unguardable in those two joint practices. I mean, he was doing really whatever he wanted to do. There was one play that stuck out really, really well to me. They ran an inside screen where Jalen was going to throw the football kind of on the inside of lane as he pushed Clowney down this way. But Clowney kind of is so long, he, kind of takes one step, and so long with one step, he's back on the inside. He puts his arms up, and Jalen kind of scoots it right underneath Clowney's arms. And in stride, Goddard just catches the nose of the football and just keeps going downfield, and nobody's near him. Cam Jurgens blows everybody up down the middle of the field, and he walks into the end zone for like an 18-yard touchdown. And I'm like, this dude, the way he moves and the way I saw him, go against safeties in the end zone, Jalen should have a lot of confidence with who he's throwing the football to, and he's protected at the same time. So my point is, really, we all know this. It falls on Jalen, but he is so, to me, level and in command. I know we talked about it this week, but I had a chance to talk to him, a little bit after practice, and he was like, man, people want me to ride waves, and I just don't do it. Like, I don't really, and he really told me, like, I don't listen to anything else outside the building. And, guys say that. I think with him, I actually kind of believe it.
Yep, I agree.
With him, it's real.
100%.
Yeah, it's real. Yeah.
Did you get a true gaze at what you were looking at in that session with the Browns in terms of what this Eagles defense might look like?
Well, Gunnar, I will say this. I'm not real high on the Browns skill position players. I mean, it's really Amari Cooper and D. That's what they have at receiver. And so I definitely think they cause plenty of problems up front. Like, I had a chance to talk to Sirianni for a little bit, and we were chatting about the front, and that's what everybody wants to know, this defensive line and what they can do. And we were kind of chatting. It's like, in the preseason game before the Browns game, Jordan Davis didn't have a stat, but he blew up the game when he was in there. And so I think there's things like that this defense does up front that just makes things easier on a secondary, where there's like maybe the only question mark on the team. And then you get, CJ Gardner-Johnson coming in, and you're like, well, okay, now where's our question in terms of roster, in terms of who's on paper? I think everybody's now really curious about, all right, Jonathan Gannon, now there's no excuse for what you have in terms of personnel. Let's see what you go out there and do. And that's why I think I think that's kind of the focal point of what people are curious about seeing. And I think in week 1 against the Lions, like, I had a long conversation on Twitter Spaces. I'm new to the Twitter Spaces world, but these like live conversations you can have. I did one for the NFL with Amon-Ra St. Brown earlier this week. And we were talking about like DeAndre Swift, him, like TJ, like they got some players. I think it's a pretty decent test, actually. He said Jared Goff's had a tremendous camp. And I think we heard Coach say that a little bit in Hard Knocks. I think it's actually a pretty good test, the way they can run the ball and throw the ball a little bit for to see what we think about this Eagles defense.
What in your estimation, James, what is realistic in terms of the ceiling this year for this team? I mean, they made it to the playoffs last year, 9-8, but you can make a case they improved themselves on paper more than any team in the NFL. So how far can you take this in what we've already talked about as a lesser conference in the AFC?
Yeah, I mean, I think they should win the division. I think if they don't win the division, that's a problem. I mean, I think that I would say, yeah, they should clearly win the division, and I would say win a playoff game. And if both those things happen, I think what happened was you answered your question at quarterback. And that's really the biggest thing that the Eagles need to figure out. You're right. I think they improved themselves better than any other team through the moves that they made in free agency, the draft, and trades. Now if you do what everybody expects you to do, it's funny, we're making this conversation, starting it out with Russell Wilson. I think there's a little bit of a comparison there with Jalen at the start of Russ's career. I mean, you have a lot of really great pieces around Russell Wilson in the early portions in Seattle, and he was young and learning things. I'm not saying Jalen is Russell Wilson or a potential Hall of Famer like Russ is, but I think it's set up for that type of team success if the quarterback goes out and runs the system the way the coaching staff wants them to run the system, which is, we know Pete's very run heavy, but I think this team has enough easy throws in this offense for Jalen to make. And I think the biggest thing that I've liked, back to your question, kind of, Gunner, from those 2 days and from what I've talked to people in camp, is they're letting him play his style of football and grow at the same time. They're fine with him going through 2 reads, and if he takes off or makes room for himself to make a play, like, why not? if that's what makes him better as a player. I know everybody's like, and I know it's driving the coaching staff insane with every question from our boys in the media going, well, is Jalen getting through his reads faster? Did he go through all his progressions on that one before he took off? And that's where I kind of get that from. If they're cool with 1 read, 2 read, and I'm going to make a play for 8 yards, is that terrible? And where he's at, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Well, James, the only thing I would counter with, and I agree with you, the only thing I would counter with is, number one, I don't want the quarterback taking off too soon, because he's not letting plays in front of him develop. His pass catchers wiggle free to get over. And number two, anytime you step across that line of scrimmage, as you know, you're more susceptible. Defensive players hate quarterbacks as it is because they're the golden children of the NFL. I don't want to see him become more susceptible to taking unnecessary shots. You know, but I agree with what you're saying.
Right. And Gunnar, you're right. And you know, it's kind of funny. We're tying this all back to like Russell Wilson, but he's a guy, and Russ and I have talked about it, that is so good at sliding and so good at getting down, that he has been so durable over the years, even though he's been one of these guys that plays outside the pocket so much. So if Jalen can make sure he protects himself, I'm not fine with this sense. But I get what you're saying too, Gunnar. But with that, I'm kind of going, and this is the way it was in Cleveland. It was like, I can go to Devon and just go and look at the defense and go, where's my best matchup with these 3 guys? Because one of them are winning right off the jump. Like, and that was happening repeatedly. Like if AJ has, you know, has Ward on him, who's one of the best corners in football in these joint practices, well, then it's like, what? Devontae's going to be open immediately. And so I think he has easy wins early by what defenses can show him. So I think those opportunities will be there, and hopefully he doesn't put himself in that situation too much. But I think he still has that ability. I mean, they're not. I thought I heard the other day out of Philly, like they're not scared to call him a power runner between the tackles inside the 5, along with their backs, which I thought was an interesting take. But that they're going to play to his strengths a little bit as he continues. But I think what you have to do is, right, Rob, like you have to play to his strengths, but have him continue to grow at the same time. You can't rely on the strengths and then not grow as a quarterback.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. That's exactly what their thought process is. James, I want to jump a touch. I know you get 2 games in front of you before you get here, but I think Minnesota's an intriguing team. And I think they're a team with now an offensive mind running things. I think they needed to change the scenery from Zimmer. You know, you got 2 killers on the outside at the receiver position. You got Dalvin Cook. You got Cousins. You know, certainly some ability on that other side of the ball as well. I think they could be a surprise team that's sort of like under the radar a little bit this year. What's your sense of the Vikings?
It's funny, we on one of our main preseason shows to kick off the year, I forget who it was on our game day morning group. It might have been Eisen or Irv picked Cousins as the MVP for this year, which I thought was a wild statement. But that does show you a little bit of, you know, a new offensive mind coming in and kind of the way Kevin O'Connell has kind of gelled with Kirk early. And that's been kind of something around the league that people are talking about, the relationship they gained. I'll say this, back to the building that I'm in. If they didn't land Nathaniel Hackett, they were going to go with Kevin O'Connell. That he blew the Broncos away in his interview. And if you remember the process with Denver, everybody thought Dan Quinn was getting this job. Right when it became open, and the history with him and George Payton, and they thought they'd be bringing in Dan Quinn, and like Kevin O'Connell blew the doors off in their interview. They actually wanted to have another one with him, just to like see some more of him. That's how impressive he was. And if a guy can do that and wow a team in that sense, obviously the team that hired him, I would assume very pleased with what they've done so far. But like, I think just the big things that jump out to me is like you mentioned some of those skill guys and stuff. And it's like, can Cook stay healthy for a whole year? Yeah. And obviously Philly's getting them right off the jump. So he's going to be there and those guys are going to be there. But like, I do think this is one of the more complete teams. Asking around the league, they had one of the better drafts in the league. They had a ton of picks, if I remember right. But they had one of the better drafts around. I just think getting your quarterback comfortable and getting your quarterback on the same page, which is what we're talking about here in Denver, is that going to be the case? That's everything. And week 1, it might be the right time to get Minnesota, because sometimes in that it takes a couple of weeks to really get on the same page.
Yeah.
Hey, James, when you look at a team like the Saints, and that's a big if we get to see a Jameis Winston who jumped out to a 14 touchdown, 3 interception start before he had the knee injury last year, with Pete Carmichael as his mentor, could the Saints be that team that upsets the entire NFC apple cart in a lot of ways?
I totally agree. I don't see too many locker rooms that are built the way New Orleans is, specifically with leadership. When you have somebody like Tyrann Mathieu that comes out, who I think is one of the best leaders I've ever been around, to come out and say, and Demario Davis, I've never seen a leader like this in my life. So, like, when you have guys that can come in when you lose a coach like Sean Payton, and you can continue to keep the locker room where it's at, and you have Cam Jordan and Demario Davis, and then you look at the secondary with Lattimore and Tyrann Mathieu and the group that they have back there, and they were so deep, they were willing to kind of, even though he's talented, give up CJ. I just think, Gunnar, that little I guess, sample size we had in Jameis Winston last year. I'm curious if it's going to be the same mindset, though, because he didn't have the weapons he has now. So they were unbelievably conservative with him and how he threw the football. I mean, he was throwing at a lower clip than he's ever had in his entire career. Now, he was protecting it, which was great, but he didn't have Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, and Jarvis Landry to throw to. He had maybe one of the worst receiving cores we've seen in recent memory that he was throwing the football to. None of those guys are even really playing for this team. And then you have Alvin Kamara out of the backfield as one of the best receiving backs in football. I'm curious if they're going to let him cut loose a little bit because of the talent that's around him. It's like, I mean, you're throwing a deep ball to Michael Thomas is a little different than the deep ball that he was throwing to the guys a year ago. It's probably going to be caught or incomplete with Mike. And so I'm curious the way Pete's going to design it, because they still believe they are a defensive team. But with that talent, you got to take some shots. The consensus around the league really is that Chris Olave is going to win Rookie of the Year. That's what a lot of people around the league really believe. And it's not crazy to think that when you look at the matchups, if Mike Thomas is healthy, he's going to get number 2 corners like crazy. He's one of the most polished receivers to come into the league in recent memory. And so it's a decent pick. And so I think the Saints are that team. And they also, no matter whether, since Brady's been there, they've given a ton of headaches to the Bucs. And you look at the rest of their division, like the Panthers are like, the Falcons are. So like they could get some easy wins. When we're talking about the AFC West, there are no easy wins. Some easy wins and some big wins. They're the team that everybody's going, oh, wow, this team's really well put together.
James, you segued right into mine. This is my last one from me. I know it's sacrilege to even question, could this be the year that you'd see a step back from Brady? But it's been a weird offseason, even by Brady standards. What's your sense of that in Tampa? I mean, you do have a new head coach. I know Todd Bowles was there as the coordinator, but there's a little bit of a transition there that we never really ever bring up. And his offensive line is a mash unit. So what's your sense of that?
That's the one. I mean, Philly was in no business being in that game at all, right? And you saw when Tristan Wirfs got hurt, how different the pressure on Brady was, because I think Wirfs is one of the best offensive linemen in football already at a young age. And I just think what has been the one kryptonite to Brady has been that pass rush up the middle. Like, he is so brilliant at stepping up and letting, edge rushers go behind him. And when you lose Ryan Jensen, I think that, I mean, we're lucky as a league to have so few major injuries this year in training camp. I mean, it was you could probably count them on one hand. I mean, I think you had the returner and receiver in Cleveland. You had Tim Patrick here in Denver. You had Ryan Jensen, and that was like it. And Ryan is so important to Brady. I know Ryan pretty well, and the way that they communicated and what he set up front in terms of protections. And then you lose your guard to go to, Cincinnati in free agency. You lose another guard to retirement. I mean, they're thin in the middle, and I think that's a big issue. He's got weapons. He always finds a way, and him and Leftwich together, though, is the positive. I mean, like, there's a relationship there that is through the roof. And him and Byron putting a game plan together. There were times, and it's a really fun couple of moments that are on NFL films, to where he comes over to the sideline to Byron, and Byron's like, "What do you think? What do you want?" And Brady's like, "No, you just call it. You're cooking, man. You're cooking. Just keep going."
Really?
When you have a guy with 7 rings tell you, "Hey, you just keep calling it. I'm not changing it." That's a pretty good relationship. But I think that interior offensive line is a big issue. It's good that Chris Godwin, local kid too, from Philly, is starting the season off a little bit closer to 100% than people thought, and I think that's a big part for them as well.
Hey, James, does Baker Mayfield rise from the ashes in Carolina?
I mean, if I could just,
I just told you a lot right there.
If I could read you the text that I'm on with a group includes Steve Smith, former Panthers great, what what's going on. And
yeah, Steve doesn't hold back much.
Steve does not hold back much. So, I do think last year was a really difficult season for him physically. Obviously, we all know, and going out there and going out and playing it, I do think was pretty gutsy. But I mean, I was there for the Thursday night game when, the team didn't know he was going to play or not. And then he kept saying he was going to play. And Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. were like, nah, we're not healthy enough to play, man. We're not healthy enough to play. And then Wednesday practice rolled around. I remember being in Cleveland and Case Keenum comes out. And they're like, Case is starting. All of a sudden, Odell and Landry were like, oh, we're good. Oh, we're good. And they both played Thursday because Baker wasn't playing. So I think that's a great indication of a change of scenery was desperately needed. I think he's an accurate passer. I think this is the last part about it is it's much more telling about where Sam Darnold is than where Baker Mayfield is. As quickly as he won that job and how fast that process happened. I think obviously Baker can rub some people the wrong way, but I know plenty of people in that Browns building too that like absolutely loved his tenacity. And when we're talking back to the beginning of guys that drive you crazy by the way they're wired, it's a little easier, Gunnar, like you said, when you got rings or when you're throwing picks and you're having issues getting the football downfield. It's a little different.
All right, I slightly lied. I don't have a football question, but I know you got to get out of here. But the Phils, you keep a close eye on the Phils.
Yeah.
So it was a bit of a rocky road on the West Coast, but they've at least rebounded slightly here. The first two games against the Marlins. Are they a playoff team, James?
I think they are, and mainly because I've seen the spurts in terms of the defense was such a question mark at the beginning of the season, and then we saw a pretty decent stretch where they were playing pretty good defensive baseball, and I think the bullpen's better than what I thought it was going to be. I just think what we saw last year needs to happen, right? You need Bryce to go on a tear. You need a couple of guys to follow that. I mean, they've had some big hits lately. They've had some collapses lately too, which have driven me completely insane. I don't get very upset about sports unless it's the Phillies. I'll be honest. Like, that's really like the main part that I get really, really angry about.
Your dad commiserating.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He's
People
a big
don't know
turn it off.
James Dad is Scott Palmer, the great Scott Palmer. Yes.
Yeah, he's a big turn it off, text me, then turn it back on. Like he can't get away. He wants to get away from it, but he can't. So like he just it's bad. Like turn around, turn back to this, ballpark.
I love it.
Hey, James, my final question to you. Season opener tonight. I'm still surprised Bills are the slight favorites on the road at the Rams' house. Who do you like in this game tonight and why?
I like the Rams just because Sean doesn't lose openers. I mean, he's 5-0 with the Rams, and they're home. The only negative I can think of for the Rams is that they're coming off like the Super Bowl high, and there's sometimes a low week one just because you're riding too high. I think the Bills are fantastic. I did the Bills-Broncos preseason game in Buffalo. I drove there from Cleveland after the joint practices, and God, the team is so deep. Buffalo is so deep. And I think that's great for the duration of the season. I just don't bet against Sean McVay in certain instances, and I think this is one of them that I think he's circled to say like everybody picking Buffalo as the Super Bowl favorite. Josh Allen's the MVP favorite. We're going to make a statement week one, and I would go with McVay. Especially it's year 2. What did they do in year 1 with him and Matthew Stafford?
I know, man.
Great point. Yeah, I don't know. We're not familiar. I don't remember that far back. James, great stuff, man. Follow him on Twitter at James Palmer TV, and of course his work on the NFL Network. When can we see you today? What time or what's your first? I'm
on in like 20 minutes. Yeah.
All right. We got to let you go do your thing, James. Appreciate it, brother.
Appreciate you, man. Yep. Be good, bro.